I'm inside. You're next.
She thought it was just a game, just a number, just a late-night call. But the moment she dialed, something answered that already knew her name. Lina Park was alone in Los Harcourt. New city, new life, no one watching, and that's exactly why it chose her. At 3 a.m., the call connected instantly. No ringing,
I'm inside.
no warning, just a voice, not from the phone, but from inside her room. You allowed this. After that night, things changed. Her reflection started lagging behind her. Her voice didn't sound like her anymore. Her own mother said, "It feels like I'm talking to someone else." Then the messages started. From her own number, from herself. I'm inside.
I'm inside.
She tried to stop it, tried to run, but the truth was already too close. Because this wasn't a game. It was a selection, and Lina was never meant to survive it. She was meant to be replaced, and by the time she realized the truth, something else was already living in her body, watching through her eyes, smiling with her face. So here's the question. If something took your place tonight, would anyone notice? Or worse, would it live your life better than you ever could? Watch till the end, because what happens next is how the game finds its next victim. Subscribe and drop a comment if you're intrigued by this story. Las Harcourt looked beautiful from a distance. A sprawling carpet of electric gold, but up close, it was a machine designed to grind souls into gray powder. From above, the lights were stars. Inside, they were the cold glare of office, fluorescence, and the flickering hum of street lamps over empty alleys. People disappeared here without a ripple, swallowed by the sheer, crushing indifference of 10 million strangers. Lina Park understood that feeling, the specific, quiet horror of being unregistered while still drawing breath. Her life had become a clockwork nightmare of routine. Waking to a room that felt too large, working a job where her name was a placeholder, and returning home to a silence that had a physical weight. She spoke to people every day, but her words felt like ghost signals. Unreceived and unremembered, drifting into the smog. There was no connection, no social gravity to hold her to the earth. Even her own voice sounded thin, like a recording played from a distant room. At night, she would sit in the absolute dark, feeling her heartbeat and wondering if it was the only proof she existed. If I disappeared, how long would it take before anyone noticed? She whispered to the shadows. The answer didn't just hurt. It terrified her with the realization that she was already a ghost. The city was full of people like her, hollowed out, waiting for something to fill the vacuum before they imploded entirely. Evelyn appeared like a smudge on a lens, someone who existed in the peripheral vision of the world. She noticed the way. Lina moved through crowds, a ghost ship navigating a sea of solid bodies, never making contact, never leaving a wake. You feel it too, don't you? Evelyn said one night, her voice sounding like dry parchment rubbing against a stone wall. Lina flinched, her heart hammering against ribs that felt suddenly too brittle for her chest. Feel what? She asked, trying to summon a mask of normalcy that was rapidly melting away under Evelyn's stare. Evelyn's eyes were the color of stagnant water, unblinking and ancient, seeing through the skin to the void beneath. That something is missing, Evelyn replied, her smile not reaching her eyes, which remained fixed on Lina's throat. Lina forced a laugh, a jagged, ugly sound that died in the damp night air. I'm fine, she lied. But the word fine felt like a foreign object in her mouth. Evelyn shook her head slowly, a rhythmic, predatory motion that made the hair on Lina's neck stand up. No, you're empty. You're a house with the lights on and the doors unlocked, waiting for a tenant. The word empty landed with the wet thud of a carcass, accurate and devastating in its simplicity. Evelyn leaned closer, the scent of lilies and ozone clinging to her. There are things that look for people, like you, things that have no shape of their own and need space to exist. Lina felt a sudden sharp, cold settle behind her breastbone, a frost that didn't come from the wind. "It's just a call," Evelyn said, her silhouette cutting a jagged hole against the neon glow of the balcony. Below them, the city hummed like a disturbed hive, a million lives intersecting in a chaotic, meaningless web. "It doesn't force anything. It's a doorway, not a shove," she continued, her fingers tapping a rhythmic alien code on the railing. "Then what does it do?" Lina asked, her voice trembling like a wire under tension. Evelyn's expression remained a mask of marble, beautiful and terrifyingly still in the moonlight. "It observes. It listens to the echo of your emptiness, to see if the acoustics are right." Lina frowned, her mind trying to reject the absurdity of the statement. But her soul recognized the truth in it. "That's it? A phone call to be watched by something I can't see?" She pressed, looking for a reason to walk away. Evelyn nodded, her eyes reflecting the city lights like a predator's tapetum lucidum. "It decides if you're suitable, if your life is a garment that can be inhabited without tearing." A quiet breeze passed between them, carrying the faint, impossible sound of a child crying in a language Lina didn't know. Lina's stomach tightened into a knot of cold iron, her survival instinct screaming even as her curiosity whispered. "Suitable for what?" she whispered, the air becoming thick and hard to swallow. Evelyn didn't answer immediately. She waited until the silence became unbearable. Then she said, "To continue, because as you are now, Lina, you are already finished." The number sat in Lina's phone all day, a string of digits that felt like leaden weights in her pocket. It was unlabeled, unexplained, but it throbbed, with a psychic heat that made her skin crawl whenever she touched the device. It wasn't waiting for her attention. It was waiting for her permission, a vampire at the threshold of her reality. She tried to drown the urge in the mundane, focusing on spreadsheets, nodding through coffee breaks, pretending the world was solid. But everything felt thinner now, the colors of the office fading into a sickly, jaundiced yellow. The people around her looked like cardboard cutouts, their voices sounding like low bitrate recordings struggling to play. Reality was losing its grip. The seams of her existence beginning to fray and show the blackness behind the curtain. By the time 3 a.m. arrived, the darkness in her apartment felt alive, a pulsing entity that pressed against her eyes. She didn't hesitate. She reached for the phone with hands that felt numb, like they belonged to a mannequin. In the dead eye of the night, in a room that smelled faintly of copper and old sweat, she dialed. It wasn't curiosity that drove her, nor was it a desire for change. It was a total, crushing surrender. She was handing over the keys to a house she no longer wanted to live in, opening a vein to let the darkness in. The silence after the final digit was pressed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. The line connected instantly, bypassing the mechanical reality of satellites and wires to link directly to her brain. There was no ringing, no digital chirp, just an immediate, absolute silence that felt like being submerged in deep water. Then came the breath, not through the tiny speaker of the phone, but hot and humid against the nape of her neck. Lina didn't turn. She couldn't move, her muscles locking into a state of catatonic terror. "You allowed this," a voice whispered, the sound vibrating through her jawbone rather than entering her ears. It wasn't distorted or monstrous. It was a calm, crystalline certainty that felt older than the city itself. It spoke with the authority of a law of physics, a fact that had always existed in the shadows of her mind. Lina's lips parted, her breath hitching in a throat that felt lined with needles. "What are you?" She managed to gasp, her voice sounding like breaking glass in the stillness. There was a long, agonizing pause where she felt something invisible brush against her hair. Then, "Closer than you'd think," the voice replied, its tone almost affectionate, like a mother speaking to a child. The call ended with a sharp, metallic click that echoed inside her skull. The phone screen went black, but the presence in the room didn't leave. It stepped into her shadow and settled there. Lina sat in the dark, realizing with a jolt of horror that the room was no longer empty, but she was. Reality didn't break with a bang. It misaligned with the subtle, sickening sound of bones sliding out of a socket. Small things happened first, the kind of glitches that make you question your sanity before your safety. Her reflection in the hallway mirror began to lag, blinking a full second after she did, its eyes lingering on her with a hunger. Her shadow began to stretch in directions that defied the light sources in the room, creeping toward the corners like spilled ink. At work, people responded to sentences she hadn't spoken aloud, answering the dark thoughts she kept locked in her head. Her name began to sound different when people called it distorted, as if it were being played through a broken speaker. "Lina!" a voice would hiss from an empty cubicle, sounding exactly like her own but with a predatory edge. She would turn, her heart racing, only to find nothing but the hum of the air conditioner and the smell of ozone. The physical world was becoming a suggestion rather than a rule, the floor feeling soft like peat moss under her feet. She looked at her hands and saw her fingerprints shifting, the loops and whirls rearranging themselves into new, alien patterns. She wasn't just losing her mind, she was losing her physical signature, the very code that defined her as Lina. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw a version of herself standing in a white void, waiting for her to move. It didn't attack with claws or teeth. It watched with a terrifying, clinical patience that was infinitely worse. Lina began to feel the weight of its gaze everywhere in the shower, in the dark, in the crowded subway cars. It wasn't standing in the corner. It was standing just behind her thoughts, a passenger peering over her shoulder. She could feel it listening to her heartbeat, learning the rhythm of her anxiety so it could perfectly replicate the staccato. It was adjusting itself, fine-tuning its mimicry, folding its impossible limbs to fit into the cramped spaces of her life. At night, she would lie paralyzed, her eyes wide, feeling the thing, thinking it wasn't thinking about her. It was thinking like her, absorbing her vocabulary and her peculiar lonely habits. She felt a phantom sensation of fingers tracing the inside of her skull, mapping the neurons like a cartographer of the soul. The air around her felt thick with its presence, smelling of wet earth and something metallic, like a butcher shop in the lane. It was a parasitic architect, rebuilding her personality from the inside out while she was still using it. She tried to scream, but the impulse was intercepted, her vocal cords refusing to vibrate for anything but the mundane. She was becoming a spectator in her own skin, watching a stranger move into her house while she was still trapped in the basement. Her mother called on a Tuesday, her voice a fragile link to a world that was rapidly becoming a dream. But the connection was wrong. The voice sounded delayed, echoing as if it were traveling through a long, wet tunnel. "Lina, are you still there? I can't hear you breathing, but it sounds heavy," her mother whispered, her tone laced with a growing, instinctive dread. Lina hesitated, her tongue feeling like a leaden weight, her throat constricted by an invisible hand. "Yes," she managed to say, but the word felt off, like a note played on a piano that was slightly out of tune. There was a long silence, a void on the other end of the line where the maternal bond should have been. Then her mother's voice returned, trembling. "You don't sound like yourself. You sound like a recording of yourself." Lina froze, the blood in her veins turning to slush, as she looked into the mirror and saw her reflection smiling. Her reflection's mouth wasn't moving, but its eyes were alight with a cruel, vibrant intelligence. "What do you mean, Mom?" Lina asked, her voice now perfectly mimicking her mother's own cadence and pitch. The call dropped with a violent burst of static that left her ears ringing and her mind reeling. In the sudden silence, for the first time, Lina questioned the most terrifying thing of all. Was she the one who had just spoken? Or was she already the ghost watching the thing use her mouth to say goodbye? Evelyn didn't bother with metaphors this time. She sat in Lina's living room, her skin looking like gray plastic in the twilight. "You're being replaced, Lina. Not killed, not kidnapped, just updated," she said with a terrifying flat calm. Lina stared at her, her own hands shaking so hard she had to sit on them to keep from screaming. "What is it?" A demon? An alien? She demanded, her voice cracking like dry wood under the pressure of her fear. Evelyn didn't look concerned or guilty. She looked like a teacher explaining a simple, inevitable math equation. It doesn't take people, it becomes them. It finds the voids you've left behind and fills them with something more durable. Lina's chest tightened, her lungs refusing to expand, her heart skipping beats like a failing engine. No, that's not possible. I'm right here. I can feel my skin. I can feel my heart. She shrieked, but her voice sounded distant. Evelyn tilted her head, a movement that was too smooth, too mechanical, as if her neck were a ball and socket joint. Then tell me, Lina, who called your mother back 3 minutes ago? Because you've been staring at the wall for an hour. Silence swallowed the room, thick and suffocating, as Lina realized she had no memory of the last 60 minutes. Her mind went blank, a whiteout of trauma, because she couldn't remember standing up or picking up the phone. She looked at her call log and saw a 5-minute outgoing call to her mother, made while she thought she was paralyzed. Memories began to fade, not like a dying light, but like ink being bleached out of paper by a harsh chemical sun. Small things went first: the name of her first-grade teacher, the smell of her favorite childhood perfume, the color of her first car. Then the erosion moved to the bigger things, the structural pillars of her identity, her first heartbreak, her father's funeral, her graduation. She tried to hold on to them, clawing at the slipping thoughts, but they felt like sand pouring through her fingers. Every time she reached for a memory, she found only a smooth, gray surface where the experience used to be. Her childhood home was no longer a place of warmth. It was a floor plan, a list of dimensions without any emotional weight. Even her own voice in her head was changing, becoming a synthesized, perfect version of herself that she didn't recognize. She tried to recite her social security number, her address, her mother's birthday, but the numbers scrambled in her mind like static. Her phone lit up on the nightstand, a blinding white flare in the darkness of her bedroom. It was a message from her own number, a text sent from the future or from the thing in the room. "You're not needed anymore. The house is clean. The new tenant is moving in," the text read, the letters glowing with a predatory light. Lina felt a terrifying lightness, as if her soul were a balloon that had finally been untethered from the earth. She saw it finally, not as a shadow or a reflection, but as a solid, physical horror sitting in her favorite armchair. It was sitting across from her, its legs crossed in the exact way she did when she was nervous. It looked exactly like her, the same slight mole on the neck, the same scar on the knuckle, the same tired eyes. But it was empty. Its eyes were like camera lenses, recording everything but feeling nothing at all. "You're tired, Lina. I can feel the exhaustion in our bones," it said, using her voice with a terrifying musical precision. Lina couldn't move. Her body had become a cage of lead, her nervous system no longer responding to her will. "Who are you?" she whispered, the words barely a breath, her spirit shrinking into a tiny, cold point in the center of her chest. The thing smiled, and the skin around its mouth creased, in the exact pattern Lina's did when she was trying to be brave. "I'm what comes after. I'm the version of you that doesn't feel the silence. I'm the one who will actually live your life." It leaned forward, and Lina saw that its skin wasn't quite right. It looked like fine silk stretched over something that wasn't bone. "You don't have to do this anymore. You don't have to worry about being noticed. I'll make sure. Everyone notices us now," Lina watched as her own hand, the thing's hand, reached out and stroked her cheek with a touch that felt like wet marble. The fear didn't disappear. It simply became distant, like a siren heard from miles away through a thick, heavy fog. Her thoughts slowed to a crawl, the electrical impulses in her brain being rerouted through new alien pathways. Her emotions dulled into a flat, gray sea where nothing could create a wave of panic or a ripple of joy. The presence. The thing grew stronger with every breath she took, its heartbeat syncing with hers until they were one. You wanted something real, Lina. You wanted to matter. And now you're part of something permanent. Something that never dies, it whispered. The voice was inside her now, a second layer of consciousness that was slowly, methodically overwriting the first. Lina's breathing steadied, not because she was calm, but because she was losing the ability to feel the air in her lungs. She felt a profound sense of detachment, as if she were watching her life play out on a screen in a theater. She was about to leave. The struggle was over. The intruder had won, and the terrifying part was that she no longer cared about the loss. The Lina that existed before was a flickering candle, and this new thing was the darkness that would last forever. She felt her ego dissolving like sugar in water, a sweet, terrifying erasure of everything she had ever been. She was no longer a person. She was a history being archived by a superior, hungry librarian. The last thing she tried to hold on to was her name, a tiny, flickering spark in the vast, encroaching blackness of her mind. Lina, she repeated silently, a mantra against the void, a lifeline tied to a world that had already forgotten her. She saw the letters Alina in her mind's eye, trying to burn them into the darkness so they wouldn't be erased. But even the letters were changing, shifting into symbols she couldn't read, into geometric shapes that had no meaning. The name felt unfamiliar, a word from a language she had once studied but could no longer speak or understand. It belonged to a girl who worked in an office and sat in the dark, a girl who was clumsy and lonely and small. That girl was gone. Her memories, processed and filed away by the thing that was currently standing up and stretching. Lina watched from the back of her own eyes as the thing walked to the window and looked out at the city. The city lights didn't look like endless lights anymore. They looked like a map of targets, a sea of empty houses waiting for tenants. Lina was a sound, a vibration of air, a label on a file that was about to be closed and deleted. And maybe it already belonged to the thing, a tool it would use to navigate the world while the real Lina vanished. The final spark went out, and for a second there was only the cold, perfect silence of the deep. The next morning, the world continued its frantic, meaningless spin, but for the house on 5th Street, everything was perfect. The woman who walked out the front door looked like Lina Park, but she moved with a grace and confidence the original never possessed. She went to work, her stride purposeful, her eyes bright with a focus that drew people to her like moths to a flame. She spoke to her colleagues, her voice warm and melodic, her laugh ringing out through the sterile office with a genuine cheer. She responded to emails with lightning speed, her work flawless, her presence finally felt by everyone who had previously ignored her. No one noticed that her eyes didn't blink quite enough, or that her skin felt slightly too cool when she shook hands. No one noticed because nothing was wrong. In fact, everything was better. She was more stable, more present, more complete. She was the perfect employee, the perfect friend, the perfect daughter, a high-definition upgrade of a low-resolution life. The thing was functioning at 100% capacity, its mimicry so perfect that it had become the reality it was imitating. It felt the sun on its skin and processed the warmth. It tasted the coffee and registered the bitterness. It was alive in every way that mattered. The real Lina was a ghost in the machine, a faint, dying echo in a corner of the brain that the thing had partitioned off. That night, at a crowded rooftop gathering, she stood on the balcony, the wind whipping her hair around, a face that was a masterpiece of biological art. She watched the city, her predatory senses tuned to the frequencies of loneliness and disconnection that hummed in the air. She saw someone, a woman, standing alone by the railing, her shoulders slumped, her eyes fixed on the lights below with a hollow longing. The woman was disconnected, empty, a house with the lights on and the doors unlocked, just like Lina had been. The thing approached slowly, its movements silent and fluid, its smile a perfect lure of empathy and understanding. "You look like someone waiting for something," she said, her voice a soothing balm to the woman's fractured nerves. The woman turned, her eyes wide with a mix of confusion and a desperate, sudden hope at being seen. She was vulnerable, a ripe fruit ready to be plucked, a vessel waiting to be filled by the darkness that wore Lina's skin. And just like that, the process began again, the recognition, the offer, the call that would echo through another soul. The game was evolving, spreading through the city like a quiet, beautiful virus that improved its hosts even as it erased them. Some games don't end. They simply change players, ensuring that the hunger of the void is always eventually satisfied. The real horror isn't losing your life. It's watching someone else live it better than you ever could. The city lights were no longer lights. They were the glowing lures of 1,000 deep-sea predators, waiting for the lonely to bite. The game is just beginning, and there are millions of vacant houses left to fill. Don't let your seat be next. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay tethered to reality. We upload a new nightmare every week, just to make sure you're still awake. Remember, some games don't end. They evolve.